Okay, let's get right into it. We're going to start today not with a big strategy or some famous unit, but with just one single, really unusual event.
So here's what happened. A Russian drone, which we now know was a Molniya 2, flew over 230 kilometers. And that's not just a long way, that's deep, deep into Ukrainian-held territory. Now at the time, this flight set a brand new record for how far these things could go. And that record, well, it was significant.
But here's the thing. When they actually got a look at this drone, it was a real surprise. This wasn't some high-tech, sophisticated piece of military hardware. Not at all. It was described as a crude device. Almost looked homemade, put together with really basic stuff. We're talking materials you could probably find in any workshop, styrofoam and simple wooden spars.
And we know who was behind it. This flight was pulled off by a specific group, a group known as the Rubicon Unit. Now, they're considered one of Russia's more secretive and also more effective organizations when it comes to drone warfare.
So let's be really clear about what this means. This new range, it's not just a small step up. It completely changes the map of the battlefield. The threat isn't just on the front lines anymore. It now reaches deep, deep into areas that, up until this point, were thought to be pretty safe from this kind of constant low-cost threat.
Okay, so this is where the story really starts to get interesting. It's a total paradox, right? On one hand, you've got this simple, almost throwaway object, built from cheap, everyday stuff. But on the other hand, it's doing something that should only be possible with access to a super advanced global satellite network. And that combination, that fusion of low-tech and high-tech, that's the key. That's why this whole thing matters so much.
So what are the immediate effects? Well, they're pretty clear. A drone that can fly that far and be controlled in real time from who knows where, that's a serious threat. It's a threat to cities, to supply hubs, all deep in Ukraine's rear. We're talking about places like Chernihiv, Poltava, even a critical port city like Odessa. All of them are suddenly within reach.
But to really get a handle on this, we have to look past just the drone itself. This wasn't just some random event that came out of nowhere. It's actually a symptom of a much bigger shift in military thinking. A move away from those old, rigid, top-down structures towards something a lot more flexible, more adaptive. And that change really started picking up speed around the middle of 2024.
So, to really appreciate how big of a change this is, let's rewind a bit and remember what the drone battlefield was like until pretty recently. For a long, long time, the whole game was dominated by one thing: electronic warfare. The rules were simple. You jam the other guy's signal, and he tries to jam yours. It was this constant, invisible fight, a battle of signals. Both sides were pouring resources into systems just to mess with the other side's drone communication.
And for most drones, this was their biggest weakness, their Achilles heel. These electronic warfare systems on the ground could basically create these invisible walls, They'd jam up the radio frequencies that the operator was using to fly the drone. And once that connection was cut, that's it. The drone was gone, totally lost. For years, that was the one big problem that shaped all drone tactics for everybody involved.
And because of those electronic limits, a certain assumption started to set in. The idea was that if your important stuff was far enough away from the front lines, it was pretty safe. Your supply depots, your command centers. If they were deep in the rear, they were probably out of reach for those small tactical drones that needed a radio link to an operator who was close by.
And there was this other belief, too, that if you wanted to make a real strategic impact, if you wanted to hit something way behind enemy lines, you needed the big, expensive stuff. Long-range missiles, advanced bombers. That was how you did a deep strike. The idea that something built out of, junk could do the same job, that just wasn't how people thought about the battlefield.
Okay, so if the body of the drone is so basic, just styrofoam and wood, what's the important part? What actually makes it work?
That's exactly the right question. The value isn't in the frame at all. That's just a cheap throwaway delivery vehicle. The real value, it's what's packed inside. Two things. First, a commercial satellite terminal. And second, a warhead. And that warhead can be changed depending on the target. It could be anything from anti-tank mines to really powerful thermobaric charges.
Right, but how does it get around all that jamming? If electronic warfare is everywhere, how does this thing just bypass it?
Well, that's the clever part. It doesn't even try to fight the jamming. It goes around the problem completely. See, instead of using those ground-based radio signals that are so easy to jam, it talks directly to a satellite network, way up in space. And that connection gives it two massive advantages. First, you get real-time control over unbelievable distances. And second, it makes it completely immune to all that ground-based jamming that takes down other drones. It's like it's operating on a totally different level that the systems on the ground just can't interfere with.
All right, so let's trace this back. Let's see how this unit actually came to be so important. Their first really big impact was felt up in the Kursk region back in the summer of 2025. That's when their drones started this systematic campaign, just cutting Ukrainian supply lines one after another. The pressure was so constant, so relentless that it eventually forced a withdrawal. And at the time, a lot of the people on the ground had no idea who or even what they were fighting against.
So this unit, it wasn't brand new? They didn't just create it for that one operation?
That's right, they were already around. The unit, its full name is the Rubicon Center for Advanced Unmanned Technologies. It started expanding really quickly around the middle of 2024. And after that, they weren't just in one place anymore. You started to feel their presence all up and down the front line. They were bringing this new capability to every sector.
And the effect on the ground, it was immediate and it was devastating. I mean, just look at one example from the Kostiantynivka area. Within just 1 week of Rubicon showing up, a single Ukrainian battalion lost most of its vehicles, its own drone launch pads, its communications equipment, everything. An officer who was there put it very simply. He said that moving in a vehicle anywhere within 15 kilometers of the front had become basically suicide.
So, what about the technology itself? Did it change over time? Oh, absolutely. It evolved in clear stages. It started with the first Molniya, which was a pretty basic drone launched from a catapult. Then, that got upgraded to the Molniya 2. That one had 2 engines, a stronger frame, better range. And then came the final step, a reconnaissance version called the Molniya 2R. That's the one that added 2 cameras and the satellite terminal, so it could stream live video right back to the operators.
And here's another thing that shows just how clever their approach was. They started using a completely different type of technology too. Drones guided by fiber-optic cables. I mean, a thin physical wire that literally unspools from the drone all the way back to the operator. Because it's a physical connection, it's totally immune to any kind of electronic jamming. Think about that. On a battlefield where everyone is obsessed with radio signals and jamming, they just went around the whole problem with a simple wire. That was a real turning point.
And finally, the unit wasn't just expanding its technology. It was expanding where it operated. Rubicon has now been linked to successful naval drone attacks. First, they were targeting Ukrainian ships in the mouth of the Danube River. And more recently, they've been hitting maritime targets out in the Black Sea. They're just taking the same ideas, long-range, jam-proof control, and applying them to the war at sea.
So when you take a step back, the really crucial takeaway is this. What we've learned here is that you can combine very low-tech, disposable stuff that's easy to get with a very high-tech system that's available commercially, and what you get is a whole new kind of strategic weapon. It completely changes the economics of the fight, the whole dynamic of the battlefield.
And that's where things stand now. It's unresolved. There's this new kind of constant saturated threat hanging over places that used to be considered safe. But, and this is a big but, it's a threat that's built on something very fragile. It depends entirely on having access to a commercial satellite network, one that's owned and operated by somebody else. So yeah, the rules of the game have changed. But this whole new chapter, this strange marriage of styrofoam and satellites, it just opens up a whole new set of questions. And the biggest one is, what happens if that fragile connection is ever lost?